Hello everyone, welcome to the first part of the Isharann Tidecaster video. This part I'm going to be focusing on the Cloak, and it's going to be a weird lime green turquoisey sort of mix, so it's going to be a lot of cream in there as well. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started. So I've built the model, it's all just in its plastic components at the moment. I have left it in sub-assemblies, and you can see here I've sped the video up because I'm just about to start putting down the base coat. So what I've done in this one to do something a little bit different is not use a black spray and white spray from a can. I'm actually going to apply a grey polyurethane primer through the airbrush. As always, I've kept the parts sub-assembled so I can easily paint all the details and bits on them later on. I've just attached the base part to a piece of cork for now, and I'll come back to that a bit later on with what I'm going to do with it. This polyurethane primer, you can see me putting on now, it's like a nice light grey colour. It does go through the airbrush without any thinning or anything, and it's kind of thin, but if you do have the pressure up a bit too high, it will displace on the surface as you spray it. So you kind of want to have it on a, I don't know, I think I've got mine about 19 psi, so it's not too strong, so it doesn't like push the paint as it's drying. So a bit of a softer spray, and again, just do it in little coats, and then as you can see I'm like flipping the model around, revisiting areas, flipping it back round, doing them again. You just want to give it a bit of chance to actually stick before you spray over the top again. To get a good surface to paint on as well with this model, I did have to do a lot of work to the gaps and some parts on the legs especially. It's a very well sort of thought out kit as in how it goes together. Unfortunately, the pieces where it does go together do have some smaller areas that you will need to, you know, put a bit of attention on. Unfortunately, with all these super techie modern kits, as good as they are, they can't hide every mold line, so you will have to do some work. This one here you won't be able to see on the fish anymore, like the little shark thing that's swimming past her. It joins in two parts halfway along its tail. It's a horrible join. I filled it with the Vallejo putty, the white sort of almost like really thin down white green stuff, I guess you could sort of treat it as. When it's dry, I sanded over it to just smooth it all out. I did also on this model try the new technique that a lot of people are using, which is the gloss varnish over a surface to sort of fill the gaps. It works. It's not amazing, but it does work. So here you can see I put a little bit of sand on the base and a couple of tiny little seashells. I bought some packs off the internet. I got them off eBay, various different shapes, sizes and textures. I'm going to paint them nice little spot colours on the base, so probably one sort of a pinky coral colour and maybe freehand a pattern onto the other one to make it look more like a shell. They do come with obviously natural patterns on them because they are real. Unfortunately, they wouldn't look quite right against a painted model. When you put something that's natural in there that's not painted, it doesn't kind of come across very well. Okay, so the grey primer's all dry now, and I've mounted the model on 32mm bases, which I can put in the Citadel paint holder, which I've actually just borrowed off someone to try out. It's okay. As it's plastic, you can sort of feel the little bit of sort of sweat on it after a while. It's not great. I'm going to get one of the decent wooden cork ones that you see a lot of painters use. I'll give those a go and let you know how it goes. So to start this project off, I'm using Game Colour Bone White thin down. I'm going to base coat the whole cloak with it. It goes off camera a little bit there because I'm just sort of getting back into the rhythm of filming with this one. Unfortunately, it didn't have the sort of results I wanted. I have kept this bit in just so I can explain why I've changed what I'm doing. On the palette here you can see I've got model colour, game colour actually, scurvy green and bone white, and then I've mixed them about 50-50 to get like a nice sort of jadey sort of colour. I have repainted over the entire cloak, as you can see here. So my idea was to paint it a light bone and then shade in the green. Instead, I'm going to do it green and then highlight up to the bone. It just, the way the turquoisey glaze worked, didn't really achieve the effect I wanted, so doing it this way instead will allow me to have more controlled bone highlights to the top of the ridges and folds in the cloak. Doing it either way has its advantages and disadvantages, starting with the darker colour and highlighting up, or starting with the lighter colour and shading down. It just depends what you're more comfortable with. I wanted to do the glazing down method, but I decided that highlighting up is more comfortable for me. That's what I'm better at, so I'm going to do it that way. And also don't forget the little bit on the bottom of her sort of chin neck bit. You'll be able to see as well I painted her shoulder pads and a bit of her chest plate. Just wanted to get the base colour down, or a darker colour, to contrast against the cloak, so I can see how the overall armour is going to look at the end with the dark to light. Alright, so on the palette here now you can see I've got the scurvy green at the top, the mid colour that I've mixed just below it, and then bone at the bottom, and then off to the side I've mixed various sort of shades of the colours together just to get like a full range from dark to light to mixing glazes. So what I'm doing now is just taking a bit of the lighter bone mixture as quite a thin colour and just sort of placing a highlight on the top. As you can see, it's not super tidy at the moment. I'm just sort of placing where the highlights are going to go, and then I'll come back and tidy them up later. I find this is a lot easier way of doing it, and you'll sort of have a better overall painting experience with it, I guess, if you place them where you think they're going to go and do them rough, than going all out, making them really nice, and then finding out they're not actually in the right place at the end. So it saves time and hassle in the long run if you do put like a highlight in the wrong place. As you can see here, I'm sort of focusing on getting the highlight towards the top of each of the folds at the where the cloak comes sort of up, and then where it dips down later on I'll obviously shade down into it. I'm using some of the new Artist Opus brushes, which you've probably seen knocking around on Twitter and Facebook and various Kickstarter pages and things. These are kind of like Winsor Newton brushes. They are really nice. I'm just sort of experimenting with them a little bit in this video. I think the one I'm using at the moment is a number 2 in the video. It could be a 1. I think it's a 2 though, judging by the size of the tip on it. So as you can see, I've picked up some of the mid colour with a little bit of bone in it just to soften out where this highlight's going to sit. These are all really thin layers at the moment, almost sort of like a glaze. It's literally just, like I said, to place the highlights roughly where they're going to go, and then we'll focus on tidying them up a bit later on. The stick I've mounted the model on is a bit too tall, so as you can see I'm holding it roughly where I think it should be with my hand. Unfortunately, because the model's on such a, like I said, long stick, it goes off camera slightly. So what I've done is I've tried to position my hand a bit higher up. It's not as comfortable though, so you'll probably see it drifting off towards the bottom again. It's just getting used to using this new paint handle and how long or high the model is above it. Like I said, could have been a shorter stick, would have made it a bit easier, but at the same time I wanted to be able to get under the cloak without blocking myself with the painting handle. So this part is just placing mostly highlights, so I'm just going to go ahead and speed it up for you. So here you can see I've gone ahead with some of the highlighting right up to the bone, just as a little test on the inside of the cloak. You can see it's gone very very bright to the tips, and then I've sort of glazed it back down into the recesses, and then I'll show this again in a minute so you can see how I got to this stage. So here I'm taking some of the slightly brighter tone and placing it on the side of the cloak, putting a fair amount on so I can manipulate the paint shortly. I'm cleaning off the brush and then just using just clean water, just feathering the paint along it. It's kind of hard to see here because it looks like I have just wiped it all off, but it is still there. It's this colour is a bit odd for recording. So again, I'm going to put some of the darker base down in the bottom there, and then I'll use a clean brush to just sort of feather the edges out just to make sure there's a nice transition between them. And then again here on the surface, get some of the brighter tone and then place it next to where we just put the darker one. While it's still a bit wet, you can blend the two colours together on the surface with some clean water. Building up thin layers like this, it does take a long time. It's not something you really want to rush through. You could do something like this with a really sort of a small airbrush gradient. The problem is there's a lot of little folds and stuff in the cloak, and then you'd have to go back in and repaint all the shades anyway. So for something like this size model wise, then you know, an airbrush cloak's probably not as effective. On something like Mortarion or Nagash, where they've got those massive flowing robes, the airbrush is amazing for that because you've got the huge flat surfaces to work with. But with this, because it's a small surface, you may as well just get in there with the brush and do it. And just practicing little glazes and layers and wet blends on little small cloaks like this, it's where you're going to pick up your sort of easy skills for then transitioning into later, bigger, more impressive blends. And remember, at this stage it's not about having the blends looking perfect, it's just about getting the colours in the right places and then prepping them for where you're going to smooth it all out later on. And here you can see I'm going back over a blend from before and just applying a darker colour over it because the shadow wasn't quite in the right place, so I've just adjusted it out there. So now we're just taking more of our brighter base tone with a lot more of the bone white mixed in, and putting in the more extreme sort of areas where it's going to be the most bright. So the tops of the cloaks and the corner bits here where I'm filling it all in. Obviously later on we're going to paint the trim, so it doesn't matter if it's messy here on this corner bit, just make sure you get it all in amongst the gaps, and then when you paint the trim over later on, it'll look quite tidy. So again here I've put some base coat down, and then I've got a slightly bit of the darker one. I'm going to mix it in on the surface here just below it, and then I'm going to use some clean water, and then I'm just going to blend the two colours on the surface there, pulling it down towards the bottom so you get a nice transition. Not too much over the top of it because the blend was sort of looking quite good there anyway, and then just feather it back out of the bottom again. I'm now going to start working in even more highlights towards the top. This one is a really thin down bone white, just straight over the top to try and really pull the cloak up to be the same sort of bone brightness that the underside is that I showed you earlier on. Again, don't worry about the trim around the cloak, we're going to do that later, but if you paint over it now with the brighter colour, you can see where the highlights are going to sit later on. And then again here, make sure you get them in all the little folds in the corner piece of the cloak there. So as you can see here, this one looks very different now. So what I've done is I've gone back into all the recesses and brightened them all up. There's still shadows down in them, but I have brightened the sort of base layer up a little bit. It was just too like turquoise, dark bluey sort of. It just wasn't quite there. And now you can see I put in the trim, and now the cloak actually starts to look really good, where you can sort of see the black really pulls it together. It's not pure black, it's model color black mixed with a little bit of scale 75 grey just to pull it off pure black. And then the scale 75, because it's super matte, it also makes the black appear really matte as well, because it's kind of a glossy one, the model color. So what I've done is I've just base coated all the trim with that. And now mixing in more of the graphite grey with the black on the palette that I made before, so it's already got a bit of grey in it. I've added a lot more to pull it out to a much brighter grey, and then I'm going to go and place the highlights along the ridges of the cloak that line up with the brightest part of the cloak. So here on that big fold, there's a highlight to go there, and you'll see me place that there, and then I'm just going to feather it in either side there. So now I'm taking more of the graphite grey, mixing into our colour just to brighten it up, and then I'm going to work these in as a thin layer across the top of the ridges there. just to brighten it up, so the highlights from the cloak flow down and then also get brighter, and a little bit of trim as well. Okay, so I've added some P3 white to the palette, and then I've mixed this into the grey, and I'm then just working up the highlights almost to a really light grey, and then just a pure bit of white around the tips. We also want to put a little tiny highlight on all of these little sort of sculpted details on the cloak. This looks kind of ropey on the recording here. It was really hard to actually get into a position where I could see the little bits and paint them in such a way. So that's all the base layers and glazes and blends all put down on the cloak, and the trim also painted as well. The next part of the video will be the armour. I've also set the camera slightly different for the armour video, so there should be a lot more central positioning of the work, not so much to the little off to the side where I was trying to get those fiddly little details. And thanks for your support, and hopefully enjoy the next part. Thanks, bye.